Hello, true seekers all over the world. This is Matthew from Back to the Covenant. Hope you're having an amazing day wherever you're at. So, this is going to be I think it's almost part 10. This is going to be part 9 of the Torah 101 series. We're going to be talking about between the evenings. So, if you can do me a favor, anybody that's in the chat, let's do a quick check on the audio. Just give me you can hear me or yes, something in the chat. Just before we move forward, make sure everything is kosher and on point. All right. So shalom to everyone in the chat and shalom to anyone that's watching this on the replay. If you're not able to catch the live, because everybody has different schedules and different stuff going on all the time. So let's jump into it and not delay. So we're going to be talking about between the evenings. So why is this topic important? So the first verse of scripture from the Torah, since Torah 101, we're going to look at Exodus 12, 3 through 6. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th day of this month, each one of them is to take for himself a lamb, according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house, take it according to the number of the beings. According to each man's need, you make your count for the lamb. Let the lamb be a perfect one, a year-old male. Take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then all the assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it when? Between the evenings. So again, that's Exodus 12, 3 through 6. So understanding between the evenings unlocks the key to correctly observing Passover. So we're going to be looking at Ben Ha-Arbayim. So the phrase between the evenings appears in the Hebrew as Ben Ha-Arbayim. There's quite a bit of debate on what the phrase Ben Ha-Arbayim really means. So I want to throw my current understanding into the mix while also looking at some of the most common understandings. So are you ready? Like it says on the sign. But first, before looking at any other scripture verses with between the evenings in it and some of the most common understandings, we need to look at the definition for evening first, which is a reb. So we're going to do that real quick. So a reb / a rev. The Strong's number for evening is H6153, which is a reb, meaning dusk, and the root word for that is H6150. So let's look at that one, which is a rob. A primitive root, rather identical. Don't worry, I won't bore you with too many Strong's numbers, because those are so much fun. But we need to look at a few Strong's numbers to get the solid understanding here for the full context of this Ben Ha-Arbayim phrase. Rather identical with H6148 through the idea of covering with a texture to grow dusky at sundown, be darkened toward evening. And then H6148, so we're going to dive a little deep on these Strong's numbers, do some word studies, which is also a rob, a primitive root to braid, that is intermix. Technically to traffic as by a barter, also to give or be security as kind of exchange, engage, intermeddle with, mingle, self, mortgage. Interesting. Occupy, give pledges, be, come, put in, surety, undertake. So with these two Strong numbers, we can see that evening means a mixture of light. It's one of the main meanings. A mixture of light and darkness. That is why when you put a dawn and dusk picture next to each other, sometimes you cannot tell the difference between the two. So now we're going to look at another source, which I would highly recommend. Don't just look at one source. Don't just look at Strong's. Look at multiple sources, just like when you're looking at scripture references, look at multiple scripture verses. So we're going to look at the Etymological Dictionary of Biblical Hebrew, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was Matthew Clark that put this together. It's an awesome resource. And if you've never looked at it, you're missing out with your scripture studies. So we're going to look at the word arab. So it starts with, quote, mix substances with no change in character penetrate with foreign matter. Number one, numero uno, mixing. And if you want to take a screenshot of this, because there's a bunch of scripture references here that I have as part of the definition, but I'm not going to look at all these. So if you want to take a screenshot real quick and check these out yourself, stay to show thyself approved. So number one, mixing without being integrated. Two, darkening. Three, being pleasant. Four, being between lender and borrower, which is an interesting rendering of this word. Five, evening, mixed shades of light. Six, twilight. Seven, rabble, mixed multitude. Eight, desolate plain. Nine, wild desert beasts. 10, raven or wilderness bird. 11, wilderness with haphazard growth. Another interesting rendering. 12, woof, horizontal weave. We'll look at that in a minute. 13, west or sunset. 14, willow, vegetation grown in wilderness. And 15 is bartered merchandise. All right, so let's look at Arab/Arab as mixture. So here are a couple scripture verses where we're going to see these two words, which are rendered as mixed or mixture. So the first verse we're going to look at Psalms 106, 34, and 35. They did not destroy the peoples as Yahweh had commanded them, but mixed with the Gentiles and learned their works. Next, back to Exodus 12, verse 38. And a mixed multitude went up with them too. Also, flocks and herds, very much livestock. And also staying in Torah, Leviticus 13:48 in the KJV, whether it be in the warp or woof, and we're not talking about a dog here, woof, woof, of linen or of woolen, whether in a skin or in anything made of skin. So a woof is if you look up the definition of woof, it's a thread that is run crosswise in a woven fabric. The fabric is interwoven or mixed together. I bet you weren't going to learn about that kind of stuff here in this teaching. We can see one of the main meanings of Arab and Arab is mixed or mixture, which makes sense at dawn and dusk. At both times, there's a mixture of darkness and light. This helps us understand what between the evenings or mixtures really is, from just before sunset to just before sunrise. Because a lot of times when people look at the word Arev, they're only talking about evening when the sun goes down. They never look at at sunrise. And there's a mixture of light at both times. So let's look at the three most common understandings of between the evenings. The first one is from sunset to dusk, basically when the sun goes down until you can no longer visually see it after it goes over the horizon. Number two, from sundown on the 13th to sundown on the 14th. Now, that's the question. Does this line up with Exodus 12, verse 6? And the last one, number three, between noon and when the sun goes down, also referred to as the two evenings or two Arev understanding, which is a common belief found in Judaism that between the evenings is at or close to 3 p.m. So let's examine all three of these in more detail, and then I will share my current understanding of when between the evenings occurs. So let's get into it. So understanding number one, numero uno, sunset to dusk understanding. So for many years, I used to believe this understanding, but when challenged by a dear brother, you know who you are, thank you, sir, I could not come up with a sufficient argument to prove my position. See, it is good to be challenged by brothers and sisters. Iron sharpens iron as long as we do it in love and we're not hateful. But if you ever get to that point where you can't support your position, it's time to make some changes. To be honest, I don't know where the scripture evidence for this comes from. Sadly, I must admit that when I believed this, I was following what other believers were doing around me, which is never a good idea. No bueno. You should always study topics out yourself before coming to conclusions to fulfill what Paul talked about in 2 Timothy 2:15. So, with this understanding, does it allow enough time to kill the Passover, prepare it, cook it, eventually eat it? No, it does not. It takes more time to do all that. If you've done all that, you know what I'm talking about. It takes time. For years, I was accustomed to getting home at around 2 a.m. or even later from our Passover service. To me, this understanding is not scriptural. So let's move on to number 2. Sundown on the 13th to the 14th understanding. This, from my perspective, is the easiest of the understandings mentioned to see that is not scriptural. This does not line up with Exodus 12:6, where we're instructed to kill the Passover on the 14th at its appointed time. With this understanding, it is killed on the 13th. This understanding is just used to get around a timing problem with Passover and the first day of unleavened bread. The problem being, after sundown on the 14th, it is the 15th. Therefore, you are eating the Passover meal on the 15th and not the 14th. And we'll talk more on that a little later. And then the last but not least, understanding number 3 is the 2 Erev or 2 evenings understanding, which is common understanding found in Judaism that goes a little something like this. The first evening starting around noon when the sun is at its highest point and starts, quote, setting from that point. The second evening is when the sun hits the horizon around 6 p.m., 3 p.m. being the midway point or between the evenings from their perspective. So killing the Passover would occur at around 3 p.m., which is between the evenings and their understanding, and they would eat the Passover meal later in the night at the start or after the 15th. So that's the question. Is this understanding scriptural? Let's see. We're going to dive a little deeper on this third one. So let's look at Passover slaughtered in the afternoon? Question mark. Can we find any evidence anywhere in scripture that hints at starting Passover anywhere close to 3 p.m. in the afternoon? So we're going to go to the Torah. It's Torah 101, Deuteronomy 16:6, just one verse. But at the place where Yahweh your Elohim chooses to make his name dwell, there you slaughter the Passover in the evening. When exactly? At the going down of the sun, at the appointed time you came out of Egypt. So we have some very specific language in this verse, not just evening. So although Deuteronomy 16:6 says in the evening instead of between the evenings, it gives us a detail that Exodus 12 doesn't provide at the going down of the sun. That's very specific. This could be an indicator that between the evenings starts when the sun goes down and not at 3 p.m. If you believe they killed the Passover in the afternoon in Exodus 12, then what do you do with this verse here in Deuteronomy 16? That would cause an inconsistency in Scripture. We don't want that. If Scripture is not consistent, we need to go back and check our theology and see if it's incorrect. Because Scripture is very consistent. Just allow Scripture to interpret Scripture. Also, we have to remember that Erev means a mixture of light and darkness, which lines up with evening being at sunset, at around sunset, because you have a mixture then. There's not a mixture of light and darkness at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. Now, with this slide and these scriptures and these couple Strong's numbers, I need you to put your thinking cap on for a minute. So we're going to look at 1 Kings 18:29. Both the first two scriptures are going to be from the KJV because I have the Strong's numbers on the screen, as you can see. And it came to pass when midday, I have that one highlighted for a reason, was past, and they prophesied until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, that there was neither voice nor any to answer, nor any that were regarded. So midday here is H6672, which is Zohar, which mostly is translated as noon or midday. And the next verse here is Judges 19:8, also from the KJV. And he rose early in the morning on the fifth day to depart. And the damsel's father said, Comfort thine heart, I pray thee. And they tarried until afternoon. And they did eat both of them. So the Strong's number for afternoon is H5186. And I would highly recommend you look at all the references I give, all the Strong's numbers, everything. Don't just watch a teaching that I do or somebody else does and just take it. Just take notes and do your own studies. So H5186 is Natah. It's translated as many different words in the English translations, like other words, but one being afternoon. And then the last verse, we're going to look at Judges 19:8, which is the same verse, but in the Brentons. And this is a scripture translation that's always a good option to reference off of your favorite and a few others when looking at verses and how they're rendered and Strong's numbers. So it renders it like this. And he rose early in the morning on the fifth day to depart. And the father of the damsel said, Strengthen thou thine heart and quit thyself as a soldier till the day decline. And the two ate. So if the first evening in the phrase between the evenings starts at noon or around 3 p.m., like some believe, why was neither the Hebrew words Natah or Zohar used in the context of any verses that have between the evenings in them? To me, that would make sense if between the evenings really started at noon or 3 p.m. when the day is declining. But that is not the case, as we saw in Deuteronomy 16, verse 6. So what about the book of Jubilees and Passover? Now, I know there's some believers out there that don't accept Jubilees as inspired or scripture. I used to think that until I opened my eyes to it. And for the short time I've read it, it's amazing how it lines up with the Torah. So if you currently don't believe Jubilees to be scripture, I challenge you to really re-examine that belief. So I want to look at a few verses in Jubilees 49, which is the chapter that talks about Passover. Pretty much the whole chapter is dedicated to Passover. So we're going to look at verses 10 through 12, since we're discussing between the evenings. Because just like in the Torah, Jubilees here mentions between the evenings, because it's consistent with Torah and Scripture if you study it out. Verse 10, Let the children of Israel come and observe the Passover on the day of its appointed time, on the 14th day of the first month, between the evenings, from the third part of the day to the third part of the night. See, this verse is very specific, very detailed, even more than what we get in the Torah. For 2 portions of the day are given to the light, and a third part to the evening. This is that which Yahweh commanded you, that you should observe it between the evenings. There it is again. And it is not permissible to slay it during any period of the light. That's problematic for understanding number 3. Let me read that part again. And it is not permissible to slay it during any part or period of the light. But during the period bordering on the evening, basically, it's very close at or around sundown, which is similar to what we read in Deuteronomy 16. It's all tied together. Just got to put the loose ends together and get the full picture. Get all the pieces to the puzzle, put them together. And let them eat it at the time of the evening until the third part of the night. And whatever is left over of all its flesh from the third part of the night and onwards, let them burn it with fire. And then in verse 19, we're going to jump down 7 verses. And in the days when the house has been built in the name of Yahweh, in the land of their inheritance, they shall go there and slaughter the Passover in the evening at sunset, at the third part of the day. The account of Passover here in Jubilees is very consistent with the Torah. Just like in the Torah, we're instructed to kill it between the evenings. But we get a specific detail here that we don't get anywhere in the Torah. It's not permissible to slay it during any part of the light, basically any part of the day. This totally disproves the first and second Arab tradition that it is found in Judaism of starting at 3 p.m. on the 14th day. If you kill the Passover at or around evening on the 14th day, which is the transitionary period into the 15th day, according to the evening reckoning of starting a day, you will have to be eating the Passover with unleavened bread and bitter herbs on the 15th day. But we can't find that anywhere in Scripture. We're not instructed to eat the Passover meal with the unleavened bread and bitter herbs and the Passover itself on the 15th day. So, what does Matt believe? From what we saw in Jubilees 49 and other scriptures, I personally believe, from my research, that Ben Ha-Arbayim, get it out, Matt, or between the evenings to be from sunset to sunrise, from the first mixing of light and darkness at evening to the second mixing of light and darkness in the morning. To me, this makes sense because Jubilees 49:12 states, let them eat it at the time of the evening until the third part of the night, basically the end of the night. Like I said earlier, it takes a while to kill an animal, skin it, prepare it to be cooked, cook it, and then finally eat it. That is why Abba gave us a big chunk of time to accomplish all this before morning time. Between the evenings, being between sunset and sunrise, also makes sense with the Passover timeline because you're supposed to have it all burnt up by morning. That would have the ending of between the evenings at the same time the Passover is supposed to be completely burnt up. None of the other understandings fit into the timeline like this does. So let's look at one more scripture in Exodus 16:12, where we see between the evenings. And I've heard the grumblings of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying, between the evenings you are to eat meat, and in the morning you are to be satisfied with bread, and you shall know that I am Yahweh Elohim. So it's interesting the way this is worded. I think it makes sense for between the evenings to start at evening and end at morning, since they ate bread in the morning. So may we all observe the scriptural Passover at the right time when between the evenings occurs, when there's a mixture of light and darkness, and stay away from traditions that nullify the commands of Elohim. All right, let me get that off of there. Show you my pretty face. All right. So it looks like we don't have any questions. Thanks for everybody that was in the chat. Shalom, brothers that are in the chat. And if you if you haven't seen any of the other, if you're stumbling upon this video and haven't seen any of the other Torah 101 videos, I highly recommend it. Just check out my Torah 101 playlist. So this is part 9, so it's 8 other videos. So I'm covering all the important topics for new believers or believers that have been keeping Torah for a while, just to help you have the best covenant relationship you can have with the Most High and His Son. So if this video was a blessing to you and you got some scriptural nuggets from it, do me a favor and like it. Leave a comment if you agree or disagree. That's okay. And then share it so we can get this message out to other believers out there and be a blessing to them. So thank you for jumping on, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your evening. Shalom, shalom.